Really great panel. I mean, look at this esteemed group of women that'll be addressing a very important topic, incident response and forensics in container land. I like that sound. It's not quite Disneyland, which is your favorite place. But some people think it. So this is Andrea Hoy, an old friend of mine. Well, no, a long-time friend of mine.
Oh, he tries so hard. I woke up very early for you, Richard.
So she received her initiation into cybersecurity community with her hard work and dedication for a safe international event earned her the role as an, what is this, assistant? Who wrote that? That makes no sense.
No
she was
idea.
the president of ISSA, and she runs her own companies for years, helping people throughout the world with security.
And I love my ISSA friends.
Yes,
I
and
do
she's been a
anything
big
for you
supporter
guys.
of us. She was the president of Orange County ISSA for many years, and a leader in the field. Chen Chi Wang, you know. Well, were you introduced this morning? There you go. So you know her. And I know her very well because we both serve on the OWASP Global Board, in which she's a big contributor. And we have Jessica Wilson. Hi, Jessica. I haven't met you before. Glad to have you aboard. She's an information security engineer on the detection and response team at Snapchat. And she specializes in digital forensics and incident response, particularly on the Mac. What's Mac? On the Mac OS platform. Well, it used to be the de facto standard for graphics, but I think Windows is now caught up. What do you guys think? But my daughter... I know. Yeah, what's Windows? Linux guys, yeah, all right. And then... that's right.
Oh.
Well said. Okay. So when I was in RSA this year, I happened upon a panel, and I saw Katie speak, and I said, I know her. She's from LA. And I'm listening to her speak, going, oh, man, I got to get her down and do a panel for us. So that's how this whole thing started. And then I knew that Chenchi's an expert in containers, and Andrea would be the perfect moderator for this. So this fell together really, really well. So Katie Curran's an information security engineer on the security operations team at Blackline Systems. It's a software company that develops cloud-based solutions designed to automate and control the entire financial close process. So we're going to hear what these young ladies have to say. Give them your full attention. Do you guys like questions in the middle, or you want them to wait until the end?
Till the end.
Till the end. All right. Stifle yourselves. All right. Thank you,
Because
Andrea.
you told me on a time limit, and you're giving me less time.
That's true. I couldn't.
I mean, you already started me off.
I couldn't resist because you guys need a special introduction. How's that?
That's fine.
All right. All yours. I'm going away. There you go.
Well, there's actually one other thing, though, that Richard didn't mention about this esteemed group up here, and that is every single one of these people up here, they give back to the community in so many different ways. I mean, if you really look at any of their bios on the internet, you'll find all these different not-for-profits, founder of diversity, equality, all these different other topics that they go and they talk on, they go and they spend their time on, their, quote, free time on, and they're always reaching out and always looking to make sure that our next generation of cybersecurity professionals is one that's well educated and has got the opportunity to have the trickle down of some good education from lessons learned from these women up here. So I really want to thank them for that. But because I'm short on time, I'm not going to go into each one. I was going to go into each one of these, that if we have time at the end, I'm going to let them talk about the not-for-profits they work for, because I think it's important to share that with the audience. Okay, so we came up with a few questions. The topic is incident response and forensics in containerland. I came out of the incident response community. I was completely into forensics initially, and obviously I turned somewhere along the way and ended up deciding that management was a better way I could control and manipulate everything that was going on. Little did I know that doesn't really work that way. All management means is that you've got, depending on how many people are in your company, you've got that many more people that think they're your boss and they want to tell you what to do. So with that, though, I'm going to start off and kick it off with basically a very easy question. I've got a few questions here we're going to cover, and hopefully we'll get through them quickly enough. But the first question is, what exactly are containers? You know, why Dockers just aren't for shoes anymore? And I think I thought that was the best one, because you go and Google Dockers, what do you come up with? You come up with the shoes first. You don't come up with the little whale. So, and I happen to like the little whale. Yep, still, Dockers still comes up first, the shoes. So, Jessica, you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually got asked this question, what is Kubernetes, by a barista, because they asked me what I was doing that day. And I'm like, oh, I did Kubernetes training. And they're like, what does that even mean? So I actually came up with a fun analogy for that. So in coffee land, you could have a giant Keurig machine that will do everything for you. It'll make you your latte, it'll make you your coffee, and it's this monolithic server, essentially, right? Like, it's a one-stop shop for everything. But nowadays, we're starting to move towards microservices, or Docker containers is one option for that, which is like having an espresso machine that just makes espresso, and a milk frother for your milk in there, and your coffee maker. And so there's these very individualized services for each. And then you can have multiple of those, and that's where Kubernetes starts to stand in. So now that we have all these independent services, we can start to scale them and handle them in a more efficient manner. So that'll be like all your baristas are helping moderate all of that different stuff. So that's how I kind of explain it to make it really easy, is it's that way to simplify and make services very compact and independent of each other, and Kubernetes allows you to manage that environment and scale it as necessary. Anybody else want to?
Anybody else want to add to that?
Sure. So what's happening in tech today is developers are asking for more automation. We are all moving towards the cloud, and everything has its own unique way of building architecture or running all these applications or services on. And what Kubernetes is allowing is that you can run everything agnostically with any cloud provider environment, with any applications, any operating systems, and basically do it on the fly. And it versus the traditional way of doing things is whatever you're running on is what you have. Containers helps provide auto scalability. It's a less resource hog on your environment, and you can wipe it out. And it's very mobile, very flexible, and it's basically, instead of a server being, having a name, it's more kind of an automated, nameless thing, and it doesn't have to have the full package. It can just be for that dedicated purpose, as Jessica described. So they are not used by every company right now, but they've been around, and now we have to look at them as being part of the environment in a lot of tech industries.
Yeah, I think that these all are really good insights. Maybe the history of how containers came about to me was interesting when I first started learning it. So we certainly had virtualization before containers. VMware is there to virtualize your hardware. But think about VMware, right? If you got different VMs running on your server and they're running guest OS. If they're running Windows, they're Windows VMs. You've got to carry that guest OS in every single VM.
I added a graphic behind you that's saying exactly what you're saying.
And it cost-wise, you have to pay Microsoft licensing fee for every single of these guest OSs. And they take time to start because they're Windows OS. And so the startup time, tearing down time is just longer. At Google, when they first started building out their infrastructure, they said, we're not going to buy those expensive Spark machines. We're going to build infrastructure. We're going to build our back-end database data center infrastructure on cheap standard x86 machines. And how do we do that but still get the scale and the reliability? So they had this project called Borg, which essentially is the predecessor of Kubernetes. And they were able to start and stop computing workloads in a very lightweight fashion. And Borg helps you move things around. Today your application may be here, and then an hour later it could be moved to a different server. And that was the beginning of container computing really delivers the scale and the functionality that for an internet scale computing company. Docker, of course, came out a little bit later, but what Docker did really well was, so I used to be a programmer, and when you develop things, you write a program, and you say, okay, now I want to test on the server. Guess what? You put on the server, it usually does not work because there's some subtle thing the OS does that you don't know, and your application's not working. And so you have to tweak, or you have to test, and a huge amount of time is dedicated to that. What Docker does is you can develop your code on your desktop, provided you have Docker installed, and the server has Docker too. You just like, okay, I pick it up and put on the server, it'll just work. And to programmers, it's like magic. And that's the reason that people love it. So it allows you to essentially develop your application in a standard way, and developers can sort of have a notion of what's going to happen during operation, and can specify what should happen during operation. So to me, that's declarative computing, which is very powerful.
Okay, which is perfect lead on. Actually, your talk right before this is a perfect lead on to our next question. And our next question is, why does DevOps keep mentioning containers versus the traditional VMs? I mean, why is it so important to dev right now? What's it doing for them? And I'm going to go ahead and start with you, Jess. Oh, actually, I think Katie. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I recently, in my environment, we're actually looking to start utilizing a lot of this more efficient tech. So I took a class on an automation software a lot of dev uses for just throwing things out there, configuring things automatically, updating things. And the software, the tool that we, like Chef is one of them, they like Docker because it's a fast way to throw up images to make test environments, and also to even do audit scalability. So in security, you can make this very streamlined, and on the fly, you can test to make sure that your environments are configured and hardened correctly. Because if you throw a baseline out there, and it sounds great, it's awesome, but to get it to be enforced consistently and easily for developers, or in the architect, or for the architecture that they're running everything on, it's a lot better if you have the automation, and Docker provides that. And it's also really powerful that you can basically do this on the fly, write a file for it, and then or use Docker in any environment. You can do it on the cloud, you can do it on your desktop, on any operating system, and just start creating and testing and doing quick test environments. And that's super powerful because that helps them write better code, more secure code. And also Docker is very aware, or other container providers, that they need to be secure. And it's if you configure it correctly, security can be actively integrated, not an afterthought. So that's why I think they're looking at containers.
How many of you right now are using Dockers, by the way? Just a show of hands. Oh, so quite a few of you are. Okay.
You use the
Go ahead.
Kubernetes?
Yes.
Okay. So if you use Docker, you don't use Kubernetes. What do you use to orchestrate?
Swarm at the moment.
Oh, Swarm.
Well, we know where we know who's winning. We know when to lose.
Well, I'll just kind of pitch then, continuing on the developer thread. I don't know how many of you guys have run into, you get code working on your machine, and you're like, okay, friend, you run it now. Here's all my code, and they try to run it, and they're missing like half of the dependencies because you installed them and you didn't remember you installed them, and your computer is configured a little differently, and it's so difficult for people to test the same amount of code. And that's why I really love Docker, is because if I just write a Docker file for this and I put in all the dependencies that they need, they don't have to think about it anymore, and we can have more of like a fast-paced development experience on that, which is really great, and we can all work in the same environment. And that's just not the case if you're just working on your laptop. So that's right there. That's helped me out a lot, be able to share my code, be able to work together and collaboratively code because we share the same environment, because Docker doesn't care about your laptop. Docker is a contained environment on its own.
Shenzi, did you want to add anything to that? Okay. Okay. Great. Okay, so why worry about digital forensics and incident response for containers? What new? Yeah, you just said that it adds some additional security, but why worry about it?
Yeah, I'll start out with that one. So in this world we live in, we have attackers that come after us. And as people start to move from the monolithic servers that are very well known now into a microservice type of environment, and very Docker heavy, very Kubernetes heavy, we're still not it's not going to decrease the attackers. It's not going to change their model. They're still going to come after us. And breaches are going to happen. They happen all the time. We hear it in the news all the time. So if we're not starting to think about, well, how do we investigate when it comes to a Docker container, when it comes to Kubernetes, if we can't track what's actually happening within there, you're going to face a lot of issues. How are you going to figure out how an attacker got in, what data that they got? How can you get them out of your environment? It's a much different land, and we have to start proactively thinking about this now instead of after the breach, because after the breach it's too late. So if we just have to be more proactive on doing that. So that's why.
So yeah, I would say you always have to worry about threat response and digital forensics. I guess the point that we're trying to address here is, are those tasks different in the container land? I think they're slightly different. They're not by itself fundamentally different, because you're still pulling information from the operating system and trying to discern whether something has happened. But where you get this information, where you can be on a server that runs containers, may be slightly different. Because traditionally, maybe you can put an agent in the application and pull data out. In a container land, it's kind of not kosher to put an agent inside a container. You can still do it, but since containers are so ephemeral, they go up and down and they move, and to build an agent in there, and as agents go, you always want to update them at some point. And you certainly don't want to tell because containers, you typically don't update them, even though there are people who do Docker exec, which is not kosher to do. But you don't want to go tell the application ops team, say, hey, I want you to take down the container because I need to update my agent for security, right? And that's just not the right way of doing it. So you typically run your agent or your sidecar or not outside of the contained application. So when that's the case, then you have to think about what kind of data I can pull and how do I map back to the container and all that stuff.
Yeah, just kind of adding to that with containers, the data trail, the audit trail, or the forensics look back, it's hard because they don't have a dedicated IP host name. They're not persistent, so there's no kernel memory stuff that you can go in and say, hey, what's going on in here? And it's really hard to trace it back. And so a lot of you have to look at how you would approach it and just understand the traditional forensics process is going to change a little bit, but there's ways around it. There's new software out there coming out and methodologies for addressing that. So.
And actually, I want to kind of add on to my response too. So if we're talking about what do you start to look for, and I think this is almost cloud agnostic and almost container agnostic too. But when you start putting things into the cloud, you have to start looking at who's making these calls, who's calling my APIs to put things in here. You have to log on that level, so it's not even at a system level at that point. It's at a cloud level where you're saying, oh, well, someone's always calling kube control deploy on this particular thing, and it's automated, and it's not for my environment, right? So you have to look at those API calls, and they can actually give you a lot more information. and just kind of start monitoring from there and think about how are your containers logging. Like now that it's not a traditional environment where it would just dump to syslog, how do I make that happen with my containers so while they may be ephemeral, my logs are not? And start to kind of evolve that strategy around on what artifacts can you keep in, what artifacts are built into the cloud provider itself for you to be able to track and monitor that just don't disappear over time. And there's also a lot of agents that are coming out now because this is such a big concern. And Google has done a lot of work with Kubernetes. I believe they kind of started that project and they help maintain it quite a bit. And they take it security really seriously there. So they've definitely tried to build in as many pathways as they can to help you along in that kind of security space and trying to deploy secure by default so that you don't have to have all the intrinsic knowledge, but they can help you along the way. And there's a lot of open source projects that can help you do that. Some of them are like Falco and Sysdig, and you have.
Falco's open source?
Yes, yeah, Falco is open source. Yep.
But that's a kernel thing. You know, it's kind of hard to get a kernel thing into your.
Yeah, it's definitely, it lives, Falco, I believe, lives kind of alongside the container, not actually within it, and then it monitors those types of.
The fact that you're geeking out, right?
Yeah. And Sysdig's very similar. I think it's if I'm not mistaken, it's a competitive type of tool to Falco, where it's like listening on the side and not inside.
Falco is Sysdig.
There's two different projects for it, I believe.
Falco is Sysdig. I mean, came out of Sysdig.
Probably, yeah.
Jimmy's like, yeah.
Anybody in the audience use either of those two, just out of curiosity?
But one of the things that I looked at some time ago was, how Kubernetes actually has a ton of security features built in, and people don't necessarily know about it. Yep. And so, for instance, I asked, maybe not Netflix, but people who deploy Kubernetes, I always say, do you use admission control? Do you have, so the logic that built in that every time somebody calls your API server, you say, is this call sanctioned by my admission control logic? And they're like, what's admission control? Mm-hmm. And so these are the controls that's built in. You can also, use a webhook and all that to hook into arbitrary logic that you have. But people don't use it. And if you don't use it, then you say, oh, my environment is not secure. Then you kind of have to take a step back and say, what are the built-in controls that I can use? So for instance, like pod policy, right? Mm-hmm. It's a really powerful control you can use within Kubernetes environment. And if you don't use it, then it's kind of your fault. So, sorry, but that is. Twistlock is different, right? Twistlock is. I mean, I used to work in Twistlock as a company. They are not. Do they do Kubernetes security auditing? I forgot. Docker security. They do Docker. Yeah, that I know. But so. There are more functions coming out now to audit your Kubernetes configuration, because there's a CIS Kubernetes benchmark too, right? But then they're not going to tell you, here's what you need to write in your admission controller. They're not going to tell you that. They're just going to say, do you use this, right? So you still have to learn and understand how to map those controls to the policies you have.
Okay, that was actually a really good discussion there, which blends right into the question of how does your incident response process need to change? We're all used to having our incident response process being documented within our business continuity plan and our disaster recovery plans, and some of us go and we actually put significant time into putting exact scenarios for those incident responses. Do you think we need to have that exact scenario in and how to handle incidents and containers? Or do you think it should be able to be handled in what we already have written in those incident response plans? And I'll throw that to anybody. I could see Shenzi's like really thinking about this.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of the question. I don't know. I mean, so I will let you. I will let you respond first.
I think tabletop exercises are one of the most valuable things that you can have for your incident response process, and so that you practice them and that you can ask these questions before something bad happens.
Right.
And so, yeah, I 100% think that you should come up with tabletop exercises so that you can start to ask these questions and go, oh, wait, I really wanted this particular type of artifact or know this particular fact, but I can't get that in my environment right now, so that you can prep for that. So while I think the overall arching incident response process is usually pretty generic and it's about keeping a level head and getting the information you need and asking the right questions, I think tabletops are where they really do shine in the sense of preparing for specific incidents. And again, it's not a matter of if it's going to happen to you, it's a matter of when. As we move into a world that's more Docker and Kubernetes and container related, it's going to happen. So you might as well prep now and create those kind of tabletop exercises.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that and highly encourage these exercises in your own environments, because they just require participants. And once you start this process of just in general, it's very beneficial and kind of gives you a good way to understand like who does manage all these things, and having the conversations with the key players, people who actually configure this stuff. So yeah, that's what I'd say. Just have the conversations and understand what's really in your environment, what you want to put in it, so you know you can handle it.
I love to know if it is indeed different. You know, once you have containers, and how exactly does it change your incident response procedure? Does it? I'm not sure.
I think overall, yeah, for me, incident response is really about asking the right questions. So I don't think it changes the actual procedure itself. It might change like some of the data collection, because clearly you got to get data from different sources. Everything's different for the actual data collection. But I would almost guess that a lot of people's incident response process, and just kind of in general, doesn't change what kind of incident it is. You go through the same kind of idea, these steps. You have this plan. How you get the data is different, but asking the questions and thinking about those, I think, stay very similar.
Do you think
I think the response may be different. I mean, right. So in the traditional world, you say, okay, there's something, maybe we patch it, right, and we issue a hot fix. And in this world, you say, let's kill it. Let's kill that workload, and let's go back. And so I think the response could be different. The analysis side, I don't know. I mean, if there are tabletop exercise people are doing that before and after container came into the picture and they do it differently, I'd love to know what that is. I just don't know.
Maybe it modifies who's on the team, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe where in the past there may not have been a specific individual assigned to be on the incident response team that was from the DevOps team, maybe this is something that's now more inclusive. That wasn't before. It was more of an afterthought. Yeah, we'll have the security analysts. They'll reach out to whoever it is that is involved with it. And maybe this may be saying, okay, because containers are so important in our environment now as far as our day-to-day and how quickly we can respond, maybe that individual needs to be on the team now, whoever the senior person is that knows the most about our configuration. That might be one of the takeaways on that.
I love to hear when she said a container is so important now. So I started 2015. I joined Twistlock 2015 because I said, oh, this is going to be really important. And then I went out, talked to a lot of people, and they were like, well, not so sure. We don't know. And today I'm like, I told you so.
Yeah. Think of how much data is contained there, right? It's not like before where, oh, well, we just have a backup over here. Everything is evolving so quickly, so fast, and everything is moving. And just like you were saying, from a dev perspective, how quickly you can actually coordinate and get new code out is just inherent in the way this architecture is. Okay, so our next question. How can you proactively configure containers to compensate for their non-persistency? It took a while for that question to come out, didn't it? So how can you proactively configure containers to compensate for their non-persistency? Who would like to take that one?
I can add in. So this question is something I think we have to look at, because with containers, they're ephemeral, non-persistent, and so in forensics, we need things after the fact to look at. And also for a DR perspective, you probably want your data and your applications and things to be there. So thankfully, Docker and Kubernetes and all the software companies that make this stuff, they're actually looking at it and recommending, and is just a logical thing, is to understand that containers are containers, but the data storage isn't a container. It's going to be outside the container. So there's now, thankfully, and very pretty cool, is they're so configurable. They can plug in and attach storage-wise to in many different ways, and they can stay mobile. There's ways to do it if you don't need mobile containers to store the data externally from the container, but you can also do it mobilely and with a clustered environment. There's a lot of cool ways to do it. So I won't go into details with any of these because there's just so many great options out there. But it's available. You just need to understand what your environment needs and configure it to that, and know that yes, even though containers are non-persistent, the data itself can be stateful. So.
Yeah, I would say that in addition to sort of on the server getting event logs out, there's also Kubernetes is a good infrastructure to pull data, because it inherently has to know how many containers it is managing and where they live and how long they've been there. So all those information you can pull from Kubernetes server, and it's a good idea to understand how to get that data and how to process that data and make that into your sort of a critical component of your analytics.
As devil's advocate, because I agree with everything you guys said, 100%, but I also would caution data for data's sake, right? And so not only getting that data because it can be persistent, but thinking about what that data actually does for you. What do these logs actually tell you, and are they actually useful within your environment? Can you create alerts based on these logs? Can you actually do something actionable with these logs? So it's not just about collecting any data. It's about collecting information, information that can help you move forward with your process, and not just saying, well, storage is cheap, I'll just collect everything. Because it is nowadays. I think we can, you can get storage relatively cheap, but making sure that data is actually meaningful in your environment, and you're not just collecting it because you can, but because you need it.
I think Google and Facebook are finding that out the hard way. Okay. What type of conversations should we have with our DevOps, sysadmin, and SOC about container security? I think probably...
I'll jump in, yeah. I think first understanding what's in your environment, because devs are going to do what's easier for devs, whether or not that's the security best practices or not. So it's understanding your environment and what actually lives there, and knowing what you should be covering. And then how can you kind of inject yourself into their workflow, because incident response, having that plan is great, but having prevention is even better. So how can you weave your way into the DevOps workflow to make it as easy and seamless for them to build security in from the beginning, instead of bolting it on afterwards and hoping that it sticks? And then I agree, kind of repeating what I said earlier, like having tabletop exercises with your incident response team to know what would happen and what data we need, and then including your devs in those tabletops, because they're going to be the people you're going to rely on, because no security person is going to be an expert in everything, and we're going to need the people who built those systems in the room. And those dev people are going to bring in some really interesting questions into your tabletop exercises, and they're going to come up with new and innovative ways to help you get the information that you need. So make sure you're when you do those tabletops, include your devs. 100% should do that.
It's interesting you said that, because one thing I've started to do on all my information security teams is I've tried to make sure I have a DevSecOps person on my team. Even if it's that they are a matrix to me, I don't care. My preference is that they report to me, but they're also part of the DevOps team. But still, I'll get what I can get.
Yeah, so some of you were here earlier for my talk, and I talked about some companies actually taking security tasks that are traditionally done by security teams and now embed them into dev tasks. And they actually see a better pickup of those tasks, and people are more incentivized to do it, as opposed to security is security team and it's their responsibility and we don't care. So I think the having that kind of conversation is great. And also I think the whole DevOps is about squeezing the lag time between dev and ops, right? Then as the lag time gets squeezed, you kind of think about where would security go? Because security gets squeezed even more, right? So, and obviously, I think longer term wise, security is actually going to be more distributed into those roles. You're going to become more of a dev type of security person, or you're going to become more of an ops kind of person with security expertise, as opposed to, oh, there's a dedicated separate security team. I think that is better for the organization, really, and also less stress on the security team.
Yeah, I can see that in my own environment and my own personal professional development. I'm very interested in how do devs do their job, because I've never been a developer, but I love just knowing, like, what are they running all this stuff on? How is it getting set up? I like knowing how sysadmins and the architect engineers actually build these environments. And I have my own projects and I like designing things, and I think it's really important that you think like they do. How are they building it? What do they really want to do? And you can work with them. And I think drawing out like a design diagram, where's the information flowing to, what needs to be integrated, exactly how is everything going to connect, and knowing exactly where that data travels, because that's how you can understand then how to configure it, and also what hardening you can put into place or security that you can implement in the same conversation so that you're doing it actively and helping them do their job better but more securely, and also getting everyone trained. Pull your devs and security team into the same trainings, get them understanding the same environments that your company wants to run things in, because that way we all can have these conversations together. So that's, I think, the way to do it. Integrate everything. I completely agree with that.
That's great. So this last question kind of evolves from the matter that I don't know how many of you have ever had something come into your environment, maybe a new application, new program. It could be anything that information security had no knowledge of but impacted you. We all know this never happens, right? So my last question is probably the most important, is what is the most important question I can ask if I learn that I'm already living in a world full of containers, but I just wasn't informed, and I'm the security person? And go ahead, Katie.
For the perspective, would the question just be anyone that finds out and they would go to the security team?
If you were like specifically the security team, and all of a sudden you're realizing, oh, I'm already in a container land and I just didn't know it.
Yeah, I would want to understand the business purpose. Why is this being pulled into the environment? How did it get in the environment without change management looking at it? Because that's supposed to be a helpful gateway. So I would just want to have a good conversation and make sure that you are not bringing yourself as this, oh, I'm here to shut you down and like tell you what you did wrong, and really don't care what you're doing. You're going to just come, back into whatever we're already doing. I would rather see it as like, oh, this is really cool. I'm glad that you're looking at more efficient ways and make our business more profitable or whatever, and look at ways to collaborate with that project. Hopefully it hasn't been running for too long, and just kind of force it into, let's run some test environments. Let's see what we can, harden, and just kind of have that whole conversation in a collaborative way, so they know that they can still do their stuff, but also, get security involved, know that we're here to help you and not like hinder you.
So security seems to be always a little bit behind, right, with the new technology coming in. And I remember when I was with Twistlock at 2015, because I was running as the chief strategy officer, whatever that means. But I was really trying to understand the market and analyze who would be buying technologies like that. And we put out a ton of educational materials, like what is a container, why a container is different from VM, all that stuff. And a ton of people come to read on our website. And so I asked the question, I said, hey, I want to, whoever downloads the white paper, I want them to pick, are they DevOps or are they security? I want to know. And guess, 2015, guess what the percentage, the breakdown between DevOps and security? It was a reading a container security company white paper. Man, you've heard some of my talks before, baby. But it was 70% DevOps and 30% security. Because DevOps all want to know, they do want to know how to secure their environment, and they also are learning everything about containers. And security couldn't care less. We walked into companies, and we would have great conversations with DevOps, and security is like, yeah, we've got one server, running Docker. Who cares? I've got 10,000 VMs there. I'm going to secure that. So it is a struggle in the beginning, right? But then what we found was really interesting was we kind of changed the narrative, if you will. Instead of saying, oh, here's new threats you have to secure, we put out content basically said, hey, DevOps security is going to be the future. It's going to be your job security. If you are a DevOps security person, you can market yourself anywhere. And then suddenly, more and more security people came to read our stuff. But I think the analogy is in the companies, you also should be thinking about new tech, the ability to understand new tech and secure new tech is what makes a security person marketable. So that's an interesting thing to think about.
I've actually used one of your papers as a training tool for my DevOps people.
For me, if I all of a sudden found out I'm in container land and didn't know it, I think my first reaction is, where's my logs? Can I look at this? What's happening? But then my next step after I figure out, take a breath, relax, will be, what's my threat model? And then how can I detect that? Where are the breadcrumbs that I can leave? So that when somebody, messes them up, when an attacker comes into my environment, how can I actually detect that? What are my real-time threats, and how can I make sure that I'm logging them and being able to detect them and monitor that from my perspective? So, yeah.
That's wonderful, wonderful.
I love that. Where's my log?
The logs. I know. I was going to say, that's a great line. Where's my log?
So, yeah. I posted on LinkedIn that it's a sort of a graphic novel kind of thing, and it got tons of likes. So the first frame is a guy running into a burning building, right? And he opens the door in the fire. And then the second frame is two guys on the floor, save me. And one of them is machine learning, and the other one's blockchain. Yeah. And then the third frame, you see this guy who came in the building, carry one guy out running, and he's carrying, the guy says, event logs.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to close on. I'm being told we have to wrap up. I don't know, can we have any questions? My little monitor there says I got 1 minute. Any quick question? If not, oh, Jimmy.
I think knowledge of Linux would be helpful, right? And there are actually a lot of courses. Yes, so he agrees. And there are local Docker meetups. Go and they do training courses once in a while. I actually used to run Mountain View's Docker meetup. And we every year we would Docker birthday. We would do those Docker birthday. We would do those training sessions. And they back then, at 2015, 2016, a lot of people want to learn Docker because again, it's a job security, right? Mm-hmm. So I see those folks that barely did a few years of programming, and they really want to sit down and learn how to put down a Docker container, how to do Docker updates and all that. So that kind of meetup places are good to get started.
For me, when I started, I had to find a project that I was passionate about, something I cared about, and then just decided this is going to be in Docker, and then I'm going to put it in Kubernetes so that I can learn that whole workflow, and I'm really motivated to do so. And the online resources are fantastic. In-person resources are fantastic. There's so many people that want to help and have written so much documentation around this. If you're, trying to get into Kubernetes, Google has an amazing blog on it, and they break it down really easily. And the Kubernetes documentation walks you through everything that you can do, and I think it's fantastic, and to really rely on those types of resources.
Yeah, and there is some new security technology coming out with for security on Kubernetes that they're trying to build it in, so it makes it a little easier, so you're not trying to look all over the place for value adds. So. And with that, I think we've got to close. Our time has been hit. Really thank you all for participating in this session. I love the interaction between the ladies up here. Let's give a hand to our panelists.